On the night of March 4, 2026, the quiet desert town of Lyman, Utah was preparing for another peaceful evening. With a population of fewer than 300 residents, Lyman was the kind of place where people rarely locked their doors. Crime was almost unheard of. Most neighbors knew each other by name, and life moved at a calm and steady pace. But on this night, something deeply disturbing was unfolding inside one of the town's homes. An 86-year-old woman had just returned home. She walked through her front door, settled into her living room, and turned on the television. What she did not know was that someone was already inside the house, hidden behind a door, waiting. Moments later, a gunshot echoed through the quiet home. The woman collapsed where she sat. But investigators would soon learn that this murder was only the beginning of something far more terrifying. Within the next several hours, 2 more women would be brutally killed only miles away, on a peaceful hiking trail surrounded by Utah's Red Rock Desert. 2 separate crime scenes, and a killer who would attempt to escape across multiple states. But in the end, it wouldn't be a witness or a confession that first pointed police toward the suspect. It would be something much smaller. A signal from a victim's key fob. This is the story of the Wayne County triple murder. A shocking crime that turned a peaceful community into the center of a multi-state manhunt. The small town of Lyman sits in the wide, open landscape of southern Utah. The area is known for its quiet rural communities, dramatic red rock cliffs, and breathtaking desert scenery. Nearby hiking trails and national parks attract visitors from around the world. But the people who live there describe Wayne County as something even more special. It is a place where neighbors help each other, where families have lived for generations, and where violent crime is almost unheard of. One of those longtime residents was Margaret Oldroyd. Margaret was 86 years old. Friends and family described her as a strong woman with a deep sense of faith and kindness. She had spent much of her life serving her community, and many locals remembered her as someone who was always willing to help others. But on March 4th, Margaret unknowingly walked into a deadly situation inside her own home. Hundreds of miles away, a young man from Iowa had been traveling across the country. His name was Ivan Miller, and he was 22 years old. At first glance, Miller appeared to be just another traveler passing through the western United States. But his background told a very different story. Back in Iowa, Miller already had several pending criminal charges. Those charges included burglary, theft, marijuana possession, and illegally carrying dangerous weapons. Court records showed that authorities had previously discovered Miller living illegally inside a cabin at Lake Wapello State Park. Inside the cabin, rangers found loaded firearms and evidence that Miller had been staying there for days without permission. Despite those charges, Miller had been released under court supervision. But he had one clear condition. He was not allowed to leave the state of Iowa. Instead of following those rules, Miller simply disappeared. He began traveling across the country. At some point during that journey, he made his way to Utah. And that is where everything would begin to spiral into violence. Not long before the murders, Miller experienced a major setback during his trip. While driving through a rural part of Utah, he crashed his truck after hitting an elk. The collision destroyed the vehicle. With no transportation left, Miller sold the damaged truck to a tow company. Now stranded hundreds of miles from home, Miller found himself without a way to continue his journey. Investigators would later say this moment may have been the turning point, because shortly after losing his vehicle, Miller began looking for another one, and he was willing to kill to get it. On March 3rd, Miller arrived in the small town of Lyman. Sometime that night, he made his way onto the property of Margaret Oldroyd. Behind the home was a small shed. Investigators believe Miller hid there overnight. From that spot, he could observe the house and watch Margaret's movements. Eventually, Margaret left her home and drove away. Seeing his chance, Miller broke into the house. But instead of leaving after searching the home, he stayed inside. He hid. Hours later, Margaret returned home. She had no idea someone was inside. After entering the house, she sat down in her living room and turned on the television. Moments later, Miller stepped out from behind a door. He raised a gun and fired. The bullet struck Margaret in the back of the head, killing her instantly. After the shooting, Miller stole her car and fled the scene. But that vehicle would not be the last one he stole that day. After leaving Lyman, Miller drove roughly 13 miles toward the nearby town of Torrey. The area is famous for its hiking trails and scenic desert landscapes. That same day, 2 women had arrived at a trailhead to enjoy a hike together. Their names were Linda Dewey and Natalie Graves. Linda was 65 years old and was known as a devoted wife, mother, and grandmother. Natalie, Her 34-year-old niece was described by loved ones as someone who brought joy and warmth wherever she went. The two women had traveled to one of their favorite places, a hiking area known as Coxcomb Trailhead. To them, it was a peaceful sanctuary. But that day, it would become the site of unimaginable violence. As the women stepped out of their white Subaru and prepared to hike, Miller saw them. He approached. Then suddenly, he opened fire. He shot Natalie first. Then he turned his weapon toward Linda and fired again. But Linda was still alive, so Miller pulled out a knife and stabbed her multiple times. The attack left both women dead near the trailhead. Afterward, Miller dragged their bodies away from the main path. He then stole their white Subaru and fled once again. Later that day, Linda and Natalie failed to return home. Their husbands quickly became worried. When they drove to the trailhead to look for them, they were met with a horrifying sight. The two women had been killed. Authorities were immediately called to the scene. Investigators began examining the area and discovered several key pieces of evidence. They found footprints, shell casings, and an abandoned Buick, the same car stolen from Margaret Oldroyd's home earlier that day. But the Subaru belonging to the hikers was gone. Police now knew the killer had escaped again. Authorities quickly launched a multi-state search for the suspect. Police entered the stolen Subaru's information into license plate reader systems used by law enforcement across several states. These automated cameras scan passing vehicles and record license plate numbers. But the most important breakthrough came from the victims themselves. One of the victims' husbands had access to a mobile app connected to the Subaru's key fob. Using that app, he was able to detect the signal coming from the vehicle. Late that night, the signal appeared hundreds of miles away in Farmington, New Mexico. The killer had traveled more than 300 miles from the crime scene. Around the same time, automated license plate cameras detected the Subaru traveling through the Four Corners region, where Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico meet. The digital trail led investigators toward Colorado. Police in the city of Durango quickly alerted nearby law enforcement agencies. Soon afterward, officers in Pagosa Springs located the stolen Subaru abandoned downtown. The suspect was still somewhere nearby. Multiple agencies joined the search. In the early morning hours of March 5th, officers finally located Ivan Miller and took him into custody. When police arrested him, Miller was carrying a handgun and a large knife. Investigators also found items belonging to the victims. The manhunt was over. During questioning, Miller eventually admitted to the murders. According to investigators, he stated that the killings had to be done. He told authorities he needed money and transportation in order to return to Iowa. To him, the victims had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Ivan Miller was later charged with 3 counts of aggravated murder. Because the case involved multiple victims and occurred during additional crimes such as robbery and vehicle theft, prosecutors indicated that the case could potentially qualify for the death penalty under Utah law. While Miller now awaits the legal process, the people of Wayne County continue to mourn the loss of 3 innocent lives: Margaret Oldroyd, Linda Dewey, Natalie Graves, 3 women whose lives were taken during a senseless act of violence, and a quiet community forever changed by a tragedy no one could have imagined. Cases like this remind us how quickly violence can shatter peaceful communities and change lives forever. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you believe justice will be served? Let us know your opinion in the comments below. If you found this documentary informative, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story so more people can learn about the case and remember the victims. And as always, thank you for watching.